This is turning the tables for me. I do so much with people interviewing me. It's an absolute delight to be on the other side of the mic. This isn't by way of warning, Terry, by the way. I've been wanting to interview you for a very long time. For those of you who don't know, Terry Salman has been a fixture in this town, well, really for as long as I've been in the town, which is a long time. My understanding is that you're Canadian-born, but you served in the U.S. military, left the military. I found out just today that you were a banking analyst, and I'll do my best not to interview you on that today. That would take the whole interview. But you went on to form an investment bank here in town, Salman Partners. You've been active in Canadian social discourse and later in philanthropy for a very long time. So we can have a very broad-ranging discussion. First of all, is that summary of the biography of Terry Salman effectively correct?
Yes.
Okay. So let's begin. The topic of this series is capitalism and morality, and you've been involved in every part of capitalism for all of your adult life, including at Salman Partners being responsible for, if not the origination, at least the financing of probably 200 public companies. You've been around capitalism for a long time. How would you, both practically and philosophically, look at capitalism from the point of view of morality? Is capitalism a moral construct? Is it an immoral construct? Talk briefly, if you can, about the whole interplay between capitalism and morality.
Can you hear me? Yeah. So I always tell people today that I'm an investment banker by training and a philanthropist by choice. I wouldn't have been a philanthropist had it not been for capitalism. I mean, the fact of the matter is that I came into this town in 1979 with 2 kids, no money, and I needed $1 million to buy Nesbitt Thomson shares, which became the Bank of Montreal shares, of which I still own today, most of them. So I went to see my banker at the Royal Bank, which is not very far from here, just up the street in Burrard and Georgia, and his name was Cor DeWitt. And I said, I need $1 million because the banks are going to acquire, the government's breaking down the 4 pillars. They're going to allow the banks to buy brokerage firms, insurance firms, and so on. And I need to buy these shares that I've been offered. And he said, well, you have too much debt. But I used Rick's leverage example at the time. He said, I can't do it. So I happened to know the man who was in charge of British Columbia, a banker by the name of John Cleghorn, who became the head of the Royal Bank, actually, and the governor of McGill University, very famous guy. But at the time, I went up to see him and I said, John, I need $1 million to buy these shares. And he said, okay. I said, but you can call my partner in Montreal, Brian Oni, who's actually a British Columbian, became a famous financier in his own right. And he said, I went upstairs a few days later, and John said, here's the check for $1 million, no repayment schedule. The only thing I knew was, and no security and interest. So that kind, and I write about him in my book in great detail because he was a man's man and knew what it was to give people a chance, and he overrode the system of the Royal Bank to give me that loan. So that enabled me many years later to become a philanthropist, but without that capitalistic environment that he provided for me and I provided for my family, I wouldn't have been able to do it.
I wouldn't say the prevailing ethos, but one ethos goes that philanthropy is only necessary because of capitalism, that the nature of capitalism is such that there's an unnatural segregation between winners and losers. You know how I feel about that maxim. But I'm curious as to whether you think that the at least statistically disproportionate rewards of capitalism are moral or immoral, given as an example that capitalism might tend to, from the point of view of the politicians at least, disproportionately reward the generation of utility rather than equality. Do you think that that system is inherently moral or immoral?
I think it's very moral. I mean, morality is a question of right and wrong. Most of the time it's a subject mostly articulated in religious circles. But you can be right or wrong under the capitalist system.
I have nothing to say. I'm gonna go with it. Now I want to change it just a little bit for fun. Apologies, Mr. Bernier. Politics has been described, I think, well by Mencken as an advanced auction of stolen property. Or better yet, in the Devil's Dictionary, where they suggest that politics is best described by looking at the roots of the word poly, of course, from the Greek for many, and tick, from the English colloquial for small blood-sucking insect. I talked to you about the morality of capitalism. Do you have any comments on the morality of politics?
It's a very good question. I think, of course, I mean, politics is a tough game, and everybody who's been in it, and I haven't been, it's hard to sometimes put in a very moral context, to be honest. But I think we live in a democracy, and same is true in Singapore and other countries, in Canada in particular. I admire people who do public service. It's a huge challenge and a large, like Max. It's a major contribution to our society, and it's really hard to justify it today in the cost of living and all the things that Rick was talking about in his talk. So I admire them more and more. They try to create a level playing field if they're doing it right. They're trying to make the world a better place, the country we live in. They're trying to, it's hard. I mean, you tax, I was just in Toronto, the new mayor of Toronto is going to tax the rich, which is not unusual. She's got some new plans which just were announced last week. And it's understandable because the city is bankrupt. So politicians have a very difficult role to play, and I'm not critical of them, to be honest.
Oh, you're a lot more charitable than me. I want to keep on this capitalist theme, given that your background and my background are fairly similar. We have something to talk about in this vein. There's a lot made of the capitalist duties of society. I suggested in a prior talk here some years ago that very often, at least, self-made rich people had already discharged their duty to society, and the consequence of that is that they became rich. They became rich because they provided goods and services at a price that people were willing to pay, and as a consequence, added money. Let's assume just for a second that that's great, but it's not enough. Let's talk about a capitalist duty to society, and in particular, their duty to at least four constituents. Their employees, their customers, their owners or shareholders, and then, quote, their stakeholders, which is a fancy way of saying society at large. What would you say to a capitalist duty to society, and in particular, a capitalist duty to those constituencies? And I'll refresh your memory as needed as to who those constituencies are.
I don't get the question entirely. Okay, just could you
what is a capitalist owe society other than competitively priced goods and services? And in particular, in building a successful business, how would you rate and describe your obligation to your customers, then to your employees, then to your shareholders, then to society at large? How would you describe your interaction, as an example, as a financier or as an entrepreneur starting Salman Partners? How would you regard your obligation as a capitalist to those stakeholders and also to society at large?
Well, I mean, the first stakeholders is to the employees, which when we started Salman Partners, we virtually didn't take any salaries. So it was obviously to the employees, to the goods and services that provided, the people that allowed me to be a securities firm, which was approved by in a very quick order by regulators. They created in the society an opportunity, a business opportunity that I never thought I would have. I learned from my predecessor company at Nesbitt Thomson, which we just had a reunion in Toronto. It was a 110-year-old company. Capitalism provided an opportunity to do something that I wouldn't be able to do in other societies, to own a business, to price myself fairly, and the services that we provided.
And beyond that, do you have a duty to society? A duty, not...
I don't have I think, me personally, because I'm very big in giving back, I think it's essential to me. I think everybody should give based on their ability to give. I think it creates a better society. I think in the environment that we live in now, it's going to make it more and more difficult. When I listen to a man who has a mortgage payment here in Vancouver that cost him $800 a month, and now it's $1,500 a month. When I see the people at the church here at Christchurch Cathedral receive 700 meals that I help to support every year, and when I see men with suits and ties in that lineup, and they're not gay people, and they're not homeless people, when I see veterans who are the most marginalized people in society, who have over 100,000 veterans have committed suicide in the United States since 2005. So do I have an obligation? Absolutely. And
is that an obligation or opportunity?
it's an opportunity.
Okay, I mean, I want to hear that. I'm not going to weigh in one way or another right now.
No, it's an absolute opportunity.
You have both run an organization, a big organization, and financed companies which became big companies. And in addition to that, you served in the Marine Corps. So I want to talk now. We can talk about duty in that context later, but I want to talk about authority. I want to talk about the origins of authority. How does one acquire authority? How does one exercise authority? And is authority best implemented in the private or public realm, if you care? I want to talk about the origins and the application of authority in your context, the way that you observed it as an example in the Marine Corps, fairly authoritarian. Salman Partners, which was probably somewhat less authoritarian, if my memory serves me well. And also in the acquisition and utilization of authority in all the companies that you financed.
I think, authority is essential in the Marine Corps, and that's provided the base of my life, actually, to be honest. I have a book, which I'm not here to sell, but Jan knows it. It's about what the Marine Corps did for me. And I had a wonderful interview with a Marine Corps magazine called Leatherneck, which has 80,000 paid subscribers. It's as big as the Globe Mail in terms of paid subscribers. And it's hard to believe, but so Mary Reinwald, who was the editor, asked me, isn't being a Marine, the authority, and being a philanthropist an oxymoron? And I thought about that for a while, and I said, not really, because the authority structure that the Marine Corps provided me enabled me to get my life together and be a good Marine that made me a better person. The Marine Corps is not about you, it's about the Marine Corps. Nobody walks around pounding their chest and saying, I'm a United States Marine. People know it. People know it for the rest of your life. So it's an authority structure that enabled me to work very, very well. Many, many famous Marines. The guy who founded GoDaddy is a Marine. FedEx is a Marine. All of them proudly talk about how the Marine Corps structure enabled them to succeed in business. So at Salman Partners, I had 100 employees. At Nesbitt Thomson, I had 200 employees. Sometimes I had to fire them when we acquired something else. But the structure that the Marines taught me about business was essential to my life.
Would you say that, given the lessons that you learned in the Marines, which is to say that authority was first imposed on you and then later, as you rose in the Marines, assigned to you, would you say that when you began to apply those lessons at Salman Partners, that legitimate authority came from the bottom, which is to say that you had to earn it from customers and employees? Or would you say that the organization operated better if you imposed it?
You know, rank in the Marine Corps has huge privileges. The lowest level non-commissioned officer is a corporal in the United States Marine Corps. A corporal sits in a dining room like this and gets served by somebody else. He sits at the same table as an officer, a non-commissioned officer. It takes a lot to earn that. At Salman Partners, we were a couple of people here a couple who worked for me once and now runs a successful mining company, Simon. I don't see him anymore, but we had a structure. He survived in that structure. He was, they worked 12-hour days, 15-hour days. The authority in the organization filtered down. You had to earn your stripes. So it was very, 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 very instrumental in keeping people and keeping them employed and being able to afford to give them bonuses and all the good things that they needed to raise their family.
And if you enjoy authority in an organization and as a consequence of being employed to, on occasion, employ authority, how do you juxtapose that with the free flow of information? If you're getting information from the organization that's maybe contrary to what you wanted to cause to occur, how can you simultaneously employ authority with your vision at the same time as you are guided by the wisdom embodied in the whole organization? Sorry for these detailed questions. I'm really curious about what Terry does.
I haven't seen these questions before, obviously.
No, you haven't.
I think the authority was imposed with a high standard. So if they didn't meet the high standard, there were consequences of that. And while capitalism allows you to be free, we had restrictions on what they could do and couldn't do. The industry changed. When I first started in this business, you could buy stocks and then underwrite them. So you could fill your own pockets with securities and then later on market it to, your company could market it to the Canadian public. That wasn't allowed and isn't allowed anymore. Self-dealing in that sense was not allowed. So the authority had broad-based rules that we were able to, to live with. And they weren't always written, but they were understood. And it doesn't mean that we were always right. We weren't.
Which question do I want to ask next?
I hope I got that right.
There's no right or wrong. I know what I think. I don't need to ask myself that. I want to hear what you think.
Okay.
I know another place I want to go. My own trajectory and my trajectory with my wife is similar to yours. We're doing, let me rephrase that, we're trying to learn more about philanthropy. I spent my whole life learning how to make money, and the process of giving it away has required at least as much work.
Yeah.
because I haven't focused on it so much. So I mean, from my own viewpoint, I actually wish that most philanthropies were for profit, because I wish that there was a mechanism for rewarding efficiency and for a fair feedback mechanism. When I talk to people who run philanthropies, very often there's no mechanism because there's no profit. It's tough to define a social good. So my own preference would probably be to invest in a philanthropic outcome in a way that I could reward managements for achieving goals. That isn't on offer, at least as far as I can tell. How, in terms of that, let's do a different question before we do this. What social goods, what causes interest you in particular? What are you trying to give money to in an effort to achieve what outcome? What causes are important to you now?
Well, first of all, I don't believe there's really any bad charity. The question is how these charities are run. And I use a rule of thumb. If the cost of operating a charity is anything more than 10%, I tend to shy away from it. My own charity, there's zero cost. It's small, but my daughters and I, my wife, we run it. We take applications from whoever sends us an application. Our costs are basically the accounting fees. So we have low costs. I heard of a leukemia organization. I won't say where because it was quite profound. The cost was over 50%. And I just thought that was too much. I'd rather see that money go to cancer research in the treatment of leukemia than I would in the infrastructure. As wonderful as the people who work for that charity apparently were, I just think it's too high. And you know, I'm involved with one large charity here, and the CEO is leaving. And charities pay well at the higher level. I mean, look, when I started St. Paul's Hospital Foundation, we raised $5 to $10 million. Now they raise $97 million every year from nothing. But the same principle, keep the costs low. And I'm not as big as I used to be on brick and mortar. I think grassroots giving is far more beneficial, and it goes a long way, and the people that don't talk about it are the ones that need it the most. So, you know, I saw some Grammy Award winner who said there's no such thing as a bad charity, and I agree with him. A lot of people do a lot of good work, and, you know, you have to spread it around.
Finally, I have to intercede with an editorial. Any charity, from my point of view, that expands the use of coercion is a bad charity. And there are plenty of organizations that seek to restrict other people in ways that I think should be felonies. So sorry for interposing my own point of view. I was agreeing with you until that statement. But I'm curious as to what causes you're interested in. I'm going to get to how to measure a charity's productivity later. Is it anti-poverty that interests you? Is it the environment that interests you? Is it health and public safety? What sort of broad causes that can't be addressed, or at least aren't being addressed by the private system, interest you as a philanthropist?
Veterans. I'm a big supporter of the Veterans Transition Network. We show up with the big corporations in terms of, what I love about this organization is they're Canadian organizations. We help people who, PTSD treatment. One story that's outlined in my book, I was riding my motorcycle and pulled over in a place called Horseshoe Bay, not too far from here, and I saw this man with a jacket and said on the back, veteran. So I said, I saw the obvious, and I said to him, "Are you a veteran?" And he said, "Yes, I am too." And then he said to me, I said, "Do you know the Veterans VTN, Veterans Transition Network?" His face went white, and he looked around, he turned at me. "They saved my life." He said, I wouldn't have gone to my daughter's graduation without them. So the Vancouver Public Library is another, I continue to give to the Vancouver Public Library because at 10 o'clock in the morning, just down the street here, people from all walks of life walk in that library, and it's like the Tokyo subway getting in there. They're from all walks of life, some rich, some poor, some homeless. I just started a program where we give a snack to people who come in there because they have no food in the morning, but they're going to the library. So, you know, it's funded by the government, but we have, of course, there's a foundation that raises money to top it up. Incredibly broad-based, helps so many people from all walks of life.
Terry, I was delighted to hear you say in an earlier part of the discussion that any charity that spent more than 10% on G&A with less than 90% going into the ground, you avoided all. I won't mention the person. There's a famous old Vancouver scamster who may be dead now, but if he isn't, he's a really dangerous human being, so I'm not going to name him. And I saw him some years ago in California, and I said, out of some morbid sense of curiosity, what are you doing now? And he says, well, I've gone legit. And I looked at him and said, no, that couldn't happen. And he said, no, really, I raise money now. For who? And I won't tell you who he raised money for, but it's a very, very famous philanthropy. I said, okay, I'll bite. You're raising money for philanthropy now. Why do you do it? He said, because they give me 90% commission. He would raise $10,000 for this philanthropy. He'd give them $1,000, use their name, and he'd keep $9,000. True story. The best scam in the world, if you do it right, unfortunately, is philanthropy. I have a different friend, Terry, who used to run a philanthropy, big one, and he was constantly frustrated when he did it because there was no means of measuring his productivity. The beneficiaries had unlimited wants. The employees had a different set of wants, which were often different than those expected by the beneficiaries. And the donors had a third set of wants. When you ran Salman Partners, there was a few people responsible for bringing in business. There were other people responsible for selling deals. There were a third group of people who were responsible for, say, trading the deals or aftermarket. But ultimately, everybody was measured by their quantitative contribution to the enterprise. Probably the way that you authorized bonuses wasn't always efficient, but you sought to make it efficient. I'm curious as to how you measure output efficiency rather than input efficiency in philanthropies.
What do you mean by output in
On the one hand, you said somebody who spends more than 10% on G&A
yes.
is a bad guy.
But no, let's say a bad guy.
Well, whatever. Not somebody that you want to give money to. Is that better?
Okay.
This particular person ran a variety of philanthropies, but one of them had to do with the provision of, in a very, very, very broad sense, health sciences. But there wasn't ever in his mind a way to measure his output that was agreeable to other participants. At Salman Partners, you had to make X amount of money a year. So you could measure, we made X amount of money a year. Our return on capital employed was X. Our return per employee was Y. In philanthropies, if you're hiring somebody to do, I don't know, something to do with the environment or something like that, how do you measure their output in a way that lets you know that your money is being employed in the way that you would want it to be employed?
You look at their proposal, you spend a lot of time visiting their projects, their hospitals, their, whatever charity is involved, whatever offspring within that charity, you go out and you do some due diligence. You actually see the impact that it has on the people that you're trying to help. And you can measure that.
How?
We had Well, the PTSD one is a perfect one. You treat so many veterans. You can measure it. You can measure whether those veterans benefit from it, whether they're okay now. It's easy to do. They have those numbers and they provide it to us.
I'll visit with you on those metrics afterwards. You know, Bonnie and I, too often we visit with philanthropies, and it would seem to us that their goal is to make the donors feel happy. And I tell them I already feel happy. I don't want, I'll give you more if I don't have to go to a banquet. This whole subject of measurement has always been interesting to me. In the interest of philanthropy, I think I'm going to give Jayant back 30 seconds of his conference. Terry, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you've enjoyed this discussion. I have to take it back, Jayant. Yes, Bonnie?
I'm curious how a Canadian boy gets into the American military.
How does a Canadian boy become a U.S. Marine?
This recent article in Leatherneck, they found it unusual. Most people join the Marine Corps to get U.S. citizenship, foreigners, that is. I did not. I just was happy being in the Marines, and I joined the Marines because of the Marines, and grateful that they took me. And they did offer me American citizenship, which I'm still have offered to me under a certain award. The Vietnam War qualifies, but I'm just happy being a Canadian, and I've never changed.
Why would you be part of two tax systems? Ladies and gentlemen, thank you all.
Yes, ma'am.
How do you feel about free market think tanks? You need to be taxed.
Sorry, I missed that. What did she say?
She's trying to raise money for a free market think tank. No, I'm sorry, we're done. Jayant has told me. So I'm exercising my authority and shutting it down. Jayant can reopen it later if he wants.